There's a lot of myths surrounding the garden that cost you a lot of money, waste a lot of time, and makes you not very successful. Let's take a look at a few of them. I've got an ice storm coming in tonight. We got one more round of cold before it warms up. Good time to go into the greenhouse. Here are some of the myths that cost you money, waste you time, and keeps you from being successful in your garden. And a lot of it has to do with vocabulary. And I've even made this mistake in episodes. I say I don't use any chemicals. That's not exactly true. What's the definition of a chemical? A chemical is any substance with a defined composition. So basically water is a chemical, and if I didn't have water on my garden, I wouldn't have a garden. We need to be real careful with the vocabulary. That's just like saying all chemicals are toxic. Well, we just talked about water. If you don't have water, you don't survive. But if you stick my head in a bucket, it probably becomes toxic. Whether a chemical comes from a plant naturally or comes from a plant in a commercial setting, they're either toxic or non-toxic, or anywhere in between. Whether it's Rhododone, which is a pesticide produced by a plant, and that's up to 15 times more toxic than Roundup. You also have Citronella, and that's 2 times more toxic than Roundup. And then we have the castor bean, and that's got ricin in it. It's the most toxic substance we know. So chemicals really make up the stuff around us. So let's look at one of the myths. Commercially produced fertilizers kill the life in the soil. Well, the nutrients in a chemical fertilizer is exactly the same as the nutrients in your organic compost. When it comes to nitrogen, nitrogen is nitrogen. When it comes to phosphorus, phosphorus is phosphorus, etc. They're the same. Now how you apply them will have an effect on the life in the soil. You put your fertilizer down, or you put your compost down, or you put your mulch down for that matter. If you till that in, if you dig it in, if you turn up that soil, you're going to disrupt that life. And that life is vital for the plants to grow. But adding a commercial fertilizer is not going to kill the life in the soil. But unless you are deficient in the nutrients in the soil, all you're doing is giving the big box store your money. You don't need to put fertilizer down. A commercial fertilizer may give some of your plants a quick boost, but over the long haul, your organic compost and your mulch does a lot better job. So then we get down to organic. What's the difference between organic and commercially grown food? Some people say it's the chemicals that are on there. Well, not necessarily. If you don't know your local grower or their practices, you can actually be getting more toxic material on that food that's called organic than the commercial growers. But for the most part, our organic farmers and gardeners, they try to produce a really quality product, and it tastes better. And there are very few chemicals in most cases. One of the reasons we eat organic is we don't want to eat pesticides. But we have to look at what a pesticide is, and we eat way more than you think. I was very shocked to learn this. 99.9% of the pesticides we get are natural. If the plants didn't make their own pesticides, we wouldn't have plants. They'd get chewed up by bugs. 0.1% of all pesticides that we eat are produced by man. Most everything else is just natural. We need to look at the myth around dirt. The earth is made up of rock, and it just breaks down to different sizes: sand, silt, and clay. It has all the nutrients your plant's ever going to need. Now we have life in that soil, and it's a symbiotic relationship with the plants, and it provides everything a plant needs. Out in nature, nobody fertilizes, nobody tills, nobody does anything. Everything grows just fine. And what we call soil is basically healthy dirt. I did have an argument with a friend of mine. He said dirt is what you get on your face, and as a kid I got a lot of dirt on my face, I'll tell you that. But dirt is the substance that makes up the earth. Now how can we improve that dirt to make really healthy soil? As gardeners, I add mulch to the top, let that break down naturally. Or you can compost and add that and let that break down naturally. And that helps feed the life in the soil. But what do you use for the compost? What do you use for your mulch? So here's a big myth. Pine needles are very acidic and you don't want to add them to your garden. Well, that's a myth. The reason things don't grow under pine trees is it shades them out and it's pretty dry under there. So all organics on your garden as a mulch work well. And that goes back to chemicals and fertilizer. Do I have to add fertilizer to my garden? You don't have to add fertilizer unless you're deficient in one of the main nutrients. Your plants need 42 different kinds of nutrients, and I guarantee you nobody ever tests for all of those. They just test for the top 3. And that gets back to rose food or orchid food or tomato food. Those are great advertising gimmicks, When you get past the pretty pictures on the bags and you look at the 10-2-5, 15-35, 42, 8-4-6 for the nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus, they can't all be perfect. They're not. They're just a sales gimmick. You don't need to add any of those. So then you come down to the myth, well, I have to add bone meal. Well, you really don't have to add bone meal. Bone meal has phosphorus and calcium. If you're deficient in one of those, it might help a little bit. But other than that, you're just wasting your money. The other myth is you have to fertilize. And I'm talking about plants in the ground. You don't have to fertilize. A healthy soil has every nutrient your plant's ever going to need. If you have a container, that's a different story, and you will have to fertilize. And that's because we water a lot, and all of those nutrients will get washed out pretty quickly. Here's the biggest myth of all of these. Fertilizers feed your plants. No, they just replace any nutrients you might be deficient in. But we have to add Epsom salts. There's so many benefits to that. Well, no you don't. Epsom salts is just magnesium sulfate. That's sulfur and oxygen and magnesium. And unless you're deficient in magnesium or sulfur, it's really not doing any good. Well, it's good for tomato blossom end rot. Well, here we go. Tomato blossom end rot is caused from overwatering, caused from a lack of calcium in the fruit, which is due to watering problems. Magnesium sulfate has nothing to do with calcium. So no, it doesn't help your blossom end rot. It doesn't do anything to get rid of pests. It doesn't do anything to get rid of diseases. And it is not a good fertilizer. Now I know I'm going to get a lot of comments saying I'm wrong. Well, comment away. But if you don't want to waste your money, probably not hurting your garden if you pour some Epsom salts on there, but you really don't need to. There's a couple other myths around the soil. You have to buy mycorrhizal fungi, and you have to inoculate with probiotics. Where it's true that mycorrhizal fungi play a really important role in your garden, in your healthy plants, so do bacteria, they're already there. So keep your money in your pocket. If you add compost or mulch on top of your garden, you help promote that life, you help keep the environment in such a way that that life thrives, breaks down the nutrients that are already in your soil, and it gives you nice healthy plants. Got a couple myths that will actually help you in the garden when it comes around to some pest control. What if you want to get rid of some ants? A mixture of borax and sugar does a pretty good job. They'll take that borax along with the sugar, and that borax is fatal to the ants. Garlic juice does a pretty good job of repelling pests. All you have to do is take a couple cloves, put them in a blender, mash them up, add some water. Of course, you're going to have to strain that a little bit so it goes through the squirter, but it does repel aphids. My favorite pest control for aphids is ladybugs. They don't cost very much. You can get quite a few shipped in. The problem is they don't necessarily stay in your garden, but they tickle, and they do eat aphids. Hopefully I've clarified some definitions and some myths that'll save you some money and make you a more successful gardener. And until next time, remember, take care of yourself, take care of your family, and God bless you. Come on, let's plant.
Let's go plant garden.